President Trump is setting himself up as the sole arbiter of war and peace decisions about who can and can't have nuclear power, what they do and don't do with it. It's very clear that the United States greenlit Netanyahu's operation. Anyone who claims to the contrary is just wanting to cover over what's clearly going on there. I mean, because you saw Trump, even in his Truth Socials, was basically cheerleading when he heard that. He didn't at all say, wait a minute, I was in the middle of doing negotiations and you're undermining it. Nothing like that. He said, hey, I gave you guys an ultimatum, 60 days, and on day 61, here comes Israel. I mean, that makes it almost irrefutable that this was coordinated. Not even just that we gave a green line, but this was part of the plan and altogether. We're going to see how that comes into play here in just a few minutes. But if you're setting yourself up as saying, I decide whether it's okay for them to have a civilian nuclear program or not, it doesn't matter what they think. I don't think they need it, so they don't need it. And because I am the sole arbiter, I get to decide whether you're going to get attacked or not. And especially by the United States. And as we've been talking for the last number of days, there is substantial combat power, American combat power being sent to the region. 3 aircraft carrier strike groups, all kinds of aviation, refueling aircraft, and other transport ships, naval assets that are going into the red, destroyers, etc. All kinds of stuff has been going into the region. So there is a lot of power that's potential power that could be applied at any time. Some of our troops have been getting out of harm's way. Some of our aircraft have been relocated from some of the more accessible airfields. Some of our troops have been either consolidating or leaving the region in Syria, all that kind of stuff. So lots of pieces moving on there, implying that we may be getting closer to that. And if you have somebody who sets himself up, listen, you got to be honest. Even if you're a big Trump supporter, you have to be honest. He is acting more like a monarch than he is the president of the United States. I've mentioned many times, but it must be repeated here again. There is no legal justification, whether in the U.S. Constitution or the 1973 War Powers Act or international law, that gives any kind of justification for the president of the United States to independently and unilaterally send troops into harm's way and attack into another country. Point blank, doesn't have that authority. But he is poised to take it. And of course, Congress is a feckless bunch, even though they have the constitutional balance of power on paper. Only a couple of members of the House and the Senate are even talking about this stuff. And so far, none of it has any traction because the institution itself has become feckless and an accomplice. We got to just call it what it is. But both parties, doesn't make any difference. And ironically, even the Democratic Party is basically taking a hands-off approach to this and not, rising up and saying, no, that's not what the Constitution says. Of course, because their guy does it when he's in power. So they don't want to set a bad precedent by, rising up and invoking the Constitution when it doesn't suit their party. That's part of the problem too. More on that in a future video. But now then, let's get back to the situation here. Are we getting closer to this war at all? One of the other questions that Trump was asked was, can we have a ceasefire? Can we just call this thing off and try to have some negotiations in a ceasefire situation? Very similar, by the way, to what is being requested on behalf of Ukraine in the Russia-Ukraine war. And in that war, obviously, the Russian side is in the dominant position. We saw just on yesterday's show, we showed you where Dmitry Peskov said, we're not going to do a ceasefire. Why would we do that? We're in the position of power. We would hand help to opportunities to our opponent and give them a chance to rebuild and recover. We're not going to do that. We're simply not going to do that. And yet all of the European folks to say, well, you're wrong, Russia. That's terrible. Everybody knows you first have a ceasefire, and then, and only then, can you talk about an end of negotiation, end of war negotiations. That's just how it works. So the question is now put to Trump, does that same thing apply here in this particular case? Can Israel and Iran stop the fighting for a ceasefire to have a negotiation?
It's very hard to stop. When you look at it, Israel's doing well in terms of war, and I think you would say that Iran is doing less well. It's a little bit hard to get somebody to stop.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard. So you see, Trump's impression is that Iran is doing poorly, Israel is doing good, so it's hard to get them to stop. So, is the standard we have to stop fighting in order to get a negotiated settlement? Or is the standard whoever's in the upper hand side gets to call the shots? I mean, it really doesn't matter what anybody thinks or what you would like to be the truth. It only matters what is the truth. And it depends on, again, we always say this, matters what's true on the ground. So at the moment, it doesn't appear that, well, we know for sure Israel doesn't have any intention to stop. They continue to go forward with this, and they continue to press because evidence indicates that their objective is not the denuclearization or the prevention of Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, but regime change. So it's pretty clear by their target set and what they've been hitting that they're trying to foment a rebellion inside of Iran to get the Iranians to ironically and perversely do for Israel what it wants to be done on the ground. We'll see if that works. But then on the other side of that equation, the assumption is that the Iranians are on their back foot. Well, it does appear that in terms of the power distribution, that Israel does have the advantage here. And when you're talking cumulative, when you measure everything together, Israel, I think, is pretty clearly on the dominant side. But when you're talking about a conflict, and this war especially, because you're not talking about, unlike the Russia-Ukraine war, where you don't have two armies that are clashing on the ground, you just have the air component. For the Israel, it's primarily air power, air-launched missiles, and then also ground-based missiles, et cetera. And then on the Iranian side, it's almost exclusively aircraft and, drones and ballistic missiles. So it's an air war is how this is so far. And the question is, who has the most capacity, who can continue producing missiles at a rate to sustain, and who can't? Now, I'll tell you a little bit about just kind of what the best we can get from open source information, from intelligence reports that have been issued, is that right now, Iran has some stockpile of missiles. There's wild diversions between what people are saying. Some say it's as few as 3,000. A couple have said it's as many as 28,000. Some say it's even more than that when you take all the different categories and put them together. No one really knows is the bottom line. But according to reports I read just this morning, most Western intelligence sources estimate that Iran can produce up to 300 missiles per month. And so that kind of matches with what we're seeing. Apparently, whatever the number of inventory that Iran has, they are probably holding back a solid percentage of that in order to act if the United States gets involved. So they don't want to deplete all of their capability. And then if the U.S. gets involved, suddenly they have no power to do anything. They want to reserve that. But the constant number of missiles that they can produce seems to be what they're on a pace to now. So they started off with, I think, like 100 missiles here and some other large number here, and then it started to diminish, and then a number of drones were sent in. Best estimates we can get is somewhere between 400 or 500 missiles have been launched by Iran so far, and about the same number of drones, long-range drones. So far, I haven't seen any reports of any drones that got through and caused any damage, but that's not necessarily the intent, because what we've also seen both by Iranians. I actually saw a translation of an interview with one of the Iranian senior generals just right before we came on the show here, who said that what they're doing is they are sending, this is, by the way, corroborated by Western intelligence and what we've seen on our own evidence with Professor Ted Postal, who explained what we're seeing on the screen, is that they're using lots of what some might call decoy missiles, older missiles that many times the warhead starts to disintegrate and comes off the body on the way down, and you see these big trails leading up behind it. That's what that is, as Professor Postal had explained to us. But every one of those missiles requires 1 to 2 interceptor missiles to come down. When the thing is, when a radar's reading, it doesn't know if it's a new missile, old missile. It just knows it's an incoming missile. When you have these drones coming in, you can shoot them all down, but you can shoot down these $30,000, $40,000 drones with a $1 to $2 million interceptor missile. Those are much more difficult to replace. And we already know that Israel is already getting low on their interceptor missile. Well, if the Iranian side can continue some kind of negotiation or a density of attacks, it's going to continue to deplete Israel's performance. We also see very clearly that when it comes to some of the better ballistic missiles, that it doesn't matter whether you're talking about the Iron Dome, the David Sling, the Arrow system, the THAAD, the Patriot system, and apparently a couple of other systems as well. Israel has 7 different kinds of systems that are integrated into the air defense. Their missiles are still getting through. So Iran appears to be on a steady state to where they can launch 20, 30 missiles per day. and stay within their production capability, if that's what it is. The Iranians also claimed that they saw all this coming, that they were taken by surprise when it happened, but they were not taken by surprise that it happened. And so they said that they had, before the attack happened, they said they had moved their nuclear material into a safe location somewhere to where it can't be hit. Obviously, they're not going to tell anybody where that is, but someplace that it's safe, whether that means it was sent someplace that no one knows about, or whether it was sent into Fordo or some other of these deeply buried bunkers where they think that it's going to be protected against even the best of our bunker buster materials. It's unknown, but they said they knew ahead of time. That's more important than you may think. Hang on just a second. They also said that they started ramping up their production of missiles, so it may be more than 300 per month. But the bottom line is it appears that Iran can maintain a strike capacity where they can continue to fire rockets every day and missiles that, and some number are going to get through. And we are seeing videos literally every day of something in Israel on fire because this continues on. So the issue here, and why that's important, is if Iran has the fissile material protected somewhere, and if they have the ability to reprocess steel somewhere, whether that's at Fordo or Bushehr or Natanz, buried deep underground somewhere else, that then you're not going to destroy Iran's capacity to make a nuclear weapon at some point. You may set it back, you may make it difficult, but you can't destroy it. The guy also on the Iranian TV said, listen, they've assassinated a number of our leaders and a number of our scientists, but we have hundreds of them. And we have the resident power or the knowledge banks. So whenever a time of our choosing, we'll simply act on it if we choose to go into the nuclear weapon program. So if they think they're going to destroy our capacity, the Israeli side is mistaken. And I think that that's probably more than just braggadocio. I believe that, it makes sense that with all the signals Israel was sending that they wanted a war, so it would have been actually ridiculous for Iran not to have taken these positions and to these precautions. So I think it's probably reasonable that that's maybe accurate to some degree or another. But it's very clear that Israel has a much, much higher possibility and threshold to succeed here. They have said, at least publicly, that it's to destroy Iran's capacity to make a bomb. That's what Netanyahu said. Well, they're not going to succeed with that. There's virtually no chance they're going to succeed with that. Now, if their actual objective was the overthrowing the regime, there is some possibility for that, but all the cards have to fall right. And it's a gamble. It's not a risk. It's a gamble, because basically they're trying to reprise the Libyan model to where they weaken the regime power structures enough for their senior leaders, their military capacity, so that people will rise up from inside. The people who are against the regime will rise up using the Israeli military as basically their proxy force and then overthrow the regime. That's not entirely implausible. It actually could happen. I think it's very unlikely, and so unlikely that it's a gamble. It's not a risk, because if you don't succeed there and you don't succeed at getting the nuclear issue off the table, then now what are you going to do, Israel? Are you just going to go into this indefinite, just back and forth missile fire every day, having your buildings and facilities blown up? And by the way, we're talking about major research facilities, energy infrastructure, fuel reprocessing position, things that Israel needs to conduct even its other wars, the other fronts of its war against Hezbollah potentially, Hamas for sure in the Gaza Strip, the Houthis in Yemen, etc. So there's a lot of things that they've got going on, and that's going to complicate their issues there too. And you just can't go on with all these wars indefinitely. And yet that is the path that we're on right now.